Hello everyone, thank you for joining us in this edition of the 6 p.m. primetime newscast on Equinoxe television, live from our headquarters in Cameroon's economic capital, Douala. My name is Pabla Jonathan. In our top stories in this edition of the news, blood continues spilling on Anglophone soil within the context of the 4-year-long armed conflict in the northwest and southwest regions of the Republic of Cameroon. The manager of Lobe Estate of Palm Plantations is one of the latest victims of the Anglophone crisis. We're going to be analyzing these, plus the post-election violence and protests in the United States of America, with the senior associate for Africa and the regional director of the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, Christopher Fominyo, who will be joining us in the second part of this newscast from the United States of America and out of the Cameroonian territory. As the COVID-19 figures continue rising in South Africa, the country's president Cyril Ramaphosa is to speak to the nation later tonight, 2 weeks after announcing tough measures including closures of business places and the sale or the ban on the sale of alcohol in the country. Stay with us. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us in this edition of the newscast on Equinoxe television. We begin right away in the crisis-hit northwest and southwest regions of the Republic of Cameroon, where blood continues spilling as the crisis worsens, with killings continuing since the start of this year. Several persons, including civilians and elements of the National Armed Forces, have been killed within the context of the crisis, after over 8 elements of the National Armed Forces and 3 civilians were killed in the northwest region of the country. One of the latest victims of the crisis is the manager of the Lobe Estate of Palm Plantations in the southwest region of the country. He was arrested and his corpse later found on the streets. We shall be bringing to you greater details on these, and civil society and political leaders have been attributing the worsening situation to the fact that, according to them, the root cause of the problem has not been adequately addressed. And we spoke to Barrister Aneneba Innocent Akufo. He is a counselor and is an attorney and counselor at law in the United States of America, and he is also a human rights defender and a major proponent of decolonization. He spoke to The Inside. Take a listen.
It has gotten to a point where violence has become a catharsis. This is what you expect of people. We do, and I do personally condemn violence on both sides. Whether it's from the government or it's from people who are asserting their right in a society that they feel they belong into. So what happened when they went to install the officers in this region of the country, it's not something that was unexpected. This is things that happen because there is a genesis of something that has not been addressed yet. You know, rather than fixing what we're supposed to fix, we try to trench on what, you know, we think it's better for us. When we were growing up, this is not the type of violence that we saw. It has been espoused. This violence has been brought on the people by the regime. And what's the natural reaction when you get attacked? The only thing is you try to defend yourself. We can lay blame on both sides on this equation, but in the end, we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, who is benefiting from all this violence in Cameroon? Who is the progenitor? Who is actually orchestrating all this stuff? These guns are not made in Bamenda. These guns are not made in Douala. These guns are not made in Yaoundé or wherever. You know, these guns have been imported from the West or whichever part of the world to kill you Africans. I don't know when we will see this and realize that we are beating the white man's war in all this stuff. And they bring these guns and you are championing, thinking that you're trying to champion a cause for the country. You are not. You are working for the white man. That is exactly what you're doing. This is another level of slavery that we've gotten ourselves into. And until the average Cameroonian sees the difference between this and the original form of slavery. The guns, the ammunition will flow. People will become very, very creative, make their own type of devices, whether it is the government or the people who are asserting their rights of freedom in a society that they feel they belong to, which is their society. These things will always continue until we find a perfect solution. We have to build a land that we leave behind for our children to look into and say, this is what my forebears did for us. We cannot be having this pro-West mentality, trying to keep, colonialism at bay in Cameroon and think that you would succeed. So again, death is death. We don't want to lose human life because of power. And this is the excesses of power that we're seeing, whether it's in Cameroon, whether it's in other African countries, whether it's in the United States or where in the world. This is where the aristocracy, the oligarchs, feel that they've gotten all their grips in power, and they don't look at those people who are downtrodden, and they feel that they have a grip on what they can manifest as their portion of power. This is what happened. At some point, we Africans, we Cameroonians, you have to sit down and look in retrospect. What have we done wrong? We cannot keep digging because we have power and we feel that we would end up with the right solution. They would never be the same.
Barrister Nineba Innocent Akufo, attorney and counselor at law in the United States of America and human rights defender, major proponent of decolonization, speaking to the inside, and equally speaking to the inside over the weekend. Padia Sanga, civil society activist based in Hamburg, Germany, says that the problem is persisting and worsening in the two English-speaking regions of the country because the government of Cameroon is not listening to other stakeholders, is not listening to the people. He thinks that some of the incidents occurring in the northwest and southwest regions of the country could have been avoided if government was proactive. Take a listen.
Don't celebrate the death of a military personnel, police officer, or anybody in the armed forces. Neither do I also celebrate the death of Amber boys. They are all Cameroonians, and we regret because the force of every nation is its population and its working force. But you want to understand that we have gotten into a situation where people are struggling to position themselves because come what may, Mr. Biya would not be there by virtue of nature and his age. Mr. Babila, Ambazonians sent some boys to go to Pakistan and be trained how to make explosive. And when they came back, I don't know if the government people, they had this information, but that is the results of what they say they were going to plant popcorns and all sorts of things. So it is because we have a government that is not listening, and they think that they know it all. These guys, when they came back from Pakistan, that is what they planned to do, and they said they were going to disrupt regional elections, they were going to plant bombs, and they were no more going to be fighting with arms because the capacity is not there, and you know that the funding is not coming. But to produce these bombs is very, very cheap, and the intelligence that we have as far as these issues of what happened in Momo is concerned, it's that one of our sisters, who is a journalist, was attacked also in that convoy, and she lost her life, which is a very regrettable thing. And all the blame goes on the Jacobini system in Yaoundé. We regret it, and we want to let the government understand that we are not going to sit and watch them do. It is time for them to take their responsibility, because they pretend to want to protect our people, and we don't know why it is happening now that all this information that are being leaked out, they did not do anything in that light to protect lives and preserve life, Babila. So it's a very sad situation. We know where it is coming from.
Now you're attributing those incidents to the pro-independence fighters, but at the same time, you're blaming the Yaoundé administration. Why?
the Yaoundé administration fabricated Ambazonia because we already knew from time immemorial that there were some Anglophones who were agitating and were always they have always had this idea of picking up weapons and fighting the government. But I will blame the government because when you are in government, you have to predict and you anticipate what is going to happen. But you don't just sit there and when things happen, you start reacting. It doesn't work like that. No government functions like that. Governments have projections they project in about 50, 30, 25 years. The Cameroon government is always reacting. It's always late in the way it does its own things. So I'm not going to vindicate, vilify the Ambazonians and vindicate the Cameroon government. It doesn't work that way.
And soldiers have been on the ground in the northwest and southwest regions of the country, according to the Yaoundé administrative authorities, including the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Territorial Administration, the Minister of Communication, and other persons fighting to protect the people and their properties, fighting to protect the territorial integrity of the Republic of Cameroon. Some of them have died in the cause, some of them have died in the discharge of their duties in the two English-speaking regions of the country, and those who are still alive are still there, and some of them have been awarded, they have been recognized for their efforts in the Anglophone crisis context, and they were awarded some medals by the governor of the Northwest region. Adolphe Lele Afrique, Stella reports from Bamenda.
These awardees are serving the nation in different capacities within the military and gendarmerie in the Northwest region. Before these recognitions, they had carried out tasks including but not limited to securing Cameroon's territorial boundaries, her people, and their property. The ceremony, chaired by Northwest Governor Adolphe Lele Afrique, saw 4 soldiers decorated with the Medal of Knight in the Order of Valor, 2 with Knight of the Cameroon Order of Merit, and 6 medalists of the public forces. Among the recipients, Brigadier General Equinoxe Divine, commander of the 5th Gendarmerie Region.
I have sentiments of joy because you see, when you are awarded, some recognition like this one, I think that you can only be happy to see that, what your input is being recognized.
Also, Colonel Mathias Charles, commander of the 51st Motorized Infantry Brigade, was specially recognized with the medal La Fille d'Or for his contributions in fighting Boko Haram in the Sambisa forest while leading Cameroonian troops within the framework of an operation codenamed Deep Punch 2 carried out between January 1st and March 28, 2018. These recognitions are a moral booster in the face of their missions, some of which are life-threatening, and some who started with these 12 defended the green, red, yellow, and a yellow star with their lives.
Onto something else now. Experts see the underdeveloped state of the road network in the Central African Economic and Monetary Community (CEMAC) zone will be the major stumbling block in the process of integration of the sub-region with the African Continental Free Trade Zone. On course, the experts regret that CEMAC will be abandoned behind. Details with Fomi Armstrong Sander.
From Libreville to Bangui, Yaoundé to N'Djamena, the road transport network remains the major means of transportation and interaction within CEMAC and the Central African sub-region. However, experts regret that the road network remains highly underdeveloped within CEMAC and the Central African sub-region.
tout est à refaire parce que les échanges sont difficiles.
Evidently, because interactions are difficult, access ways are almost inexistent.
Complètement inaccessible.
In the course of a forum dedicated to the performance of the network and interactivity in CEMAC, experts identified the underdeveloped network within CEMAC and the Central African sub-region as the major challenges to the proper sub-regional integration. At the time when measures are being finalized for the kickoff of the continental free trade in Africa, the expert who attended the forum in Douala says CEMAC will be left behind by the rest of the African continent.
Nous allons faire une véritable force de proposition.
Participants at the forum suggest that CEMAC member countries should make civil society actors key participants in the developing of the road network if they want to do it fast and effective.
Que nous soyons contactés.
The civil society associations say they have got experiences in diverse domains in different areas which could be used to facilitate the development process within CEMAC.
Vous pouvez quitter le Bénin pour aller par la route, bien sûr. Quitter le Bénin pour aller au Nigeria, quitter le Bénin pour aller au Burkina par la route. Donc vous voyez.
Other participants believe that the West African sub-regional experience could also serve as a worthy example for CEMAC.
En Côte d'Ivoire à partir du Ghana. Donc l'Afrique de l'Ouest est vraiment un exemple concret en termes d'interconnexion.
Within ECOWAS, for example, one can easily move by road from Benin to Nigeria or to Burkina Faso on a well-developed stretch. CEMAC unfortunately presents a different picture, according to participants in the forum in Douala.
We know that Central Africa is more open to other sub-region than their sub-region.
The CEMAC sub-region has a couple of integrative projects on its agenda which are presented as potential solutions to the problems of free and effective movement of goods and services within the sub-region, qualified as least integrative in the African continent.
Out of Cameroon, Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune is back to Germany for treatment less than a month after he returned. He was being treated for COVID-19 for 2 months until December 29, when he returned home. The 75-year-old president will be treated for a foot problem related to the coronavirus infection. The president's 2-month absence had fueled speculations over his ability to finish his first mandate. He contracted the coronavirus in October last year when some of his close staff tested positive. South Africa is the African country with the highest number of coronavirus cases. It is the worst hit by the coronavirus pandemic. It has reported 1.2 million cases of the COVID-19 and at least 33,000 deaths. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa will give a national address about the country's response to the pandemic tonight. This comes 2 weeks after he announced tough measures, including the closure of business sites and banning the sale of alcohol. The measures are intended to deal with a rise in cases attributed to a new wave, easily transmissible variant. And a statement from the presidency today said the address to the nation will focus on the unfolding pandemic in the country and on the continent, including efforts to secure vaccines for all. Last week, South Africa's health ministry announced that the country will acquire 1 million COVID-19 vaccine doses from the Serum Institute of India in January, and an additional 500,000 doses in February. Officials said more than 1 million healthcare workers, both in the public and private hospitals, will be prioritized for vaccination. That's it for the first part of this edition of the news. Talking Point is up next. Dr. Christopher Fomunyo, Senior Associate for Africa and Regional Director of the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, is joining us from the United States. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be with you.
We begin from your home country, where blood continues spilling in the two English-speaking regions of the country. Elements of the National Armed Forces, soldiers, and of course civilians dying in the course of the Anglophone crisis. And one of the latest victims is the manager of the Lobe estate of palm plantations. What's your analysis of the situation on the ground?
Well, let me first start by expressing my condolences to all of the people of the Northwest and Southwest regions and the families of the bereaved, because we all feel the pain, the suffering that's being inflicted on our people. You talked about the manager of Pamole Estate, but then on top of that, we've also had a principal in Tinto in Manu Division who was assassinated. We had another principal shot in the leg. We have workers in plantations whose fingers have been chopped off. And then we have the massacre that is just taking place in Motu village in Muyuka. And the list is getting longer by the day, and it's extremely painful to see the level of violence that is now taking root amongst our people, and the violence that seems to be accompanied by impunity and a sense of indifference to human suffering and the destruction that's been inflicted. It's so painful to watch, and I think it comes a point where we all have to stand up and say enough is enough. We have to bring this violence to an end.
Enough is enough. We've been hearing this for the past 4 years, but the enough seems not to be enough, as the blood continues spilling, the atrocities continues, even with the efforts of governments to implement the recommendations of the major national dialogue to put in place the regional assemblies, the regional institutions, and trying to solve the problem with other military actions going on simultaneously in the northwest and southwest regions of the country. The killings have continued.
You're very right. The killings have continued. And you may remember that in 2017, when the violence and the shooting really began, that I warned at the time that if you take a military solution to a political problem, you're not going to be able to tackle the problem. And collectively, we as a society are going to lose our humanity. And it's so painful to watch that in the past 4 years, we have increasingly lost that humanity. And that today, seeing a corpse by the roadside, killing women and children, killing unarmed civilians, killing professionals just for, or kids just for going to school, as we saw in Kumba not too long ago, that these things have become part of the fabric of society, which really means that we have to sit back and revise the approach that we're taking to this crisis. That whatever we've tried to do in the past 4 years hasn't worked. We have to recognize that, and therefore feel compelled to rethink the approach and to realize that and recognize that these are political issues that are going to be resolved through political means of dialogue, of mediation, of negotiations, so that we can bring this suffering to an end. Violence only begets violence. And right now, I'm concerned not just about this conflict, but I'm already concerned about the next conflict. Because with the suffering that people have gone through, with the thousands of people that have been killed, the thousands of lives that have been lost, the close to 800,000 people that are now internally displaced, the close to 70,000 people that are now refugees in neighboring Nigeria, and even spread in other African countries, in the Middle East, in the Caribbean, around the globe, that people are not going to forget and forgive easily the suffering that they're going through. So this is an interpellation for all of us to rethink the approach that is being taken to this conflict and to recognize that violence and military options are not viable, and that we are going to have to sit down and negotiate our way out of the current crisis.
Barrister Aneniba Innocent Akufo, an attorney and counselor at law, human rights defender there in the United States, thinks that the atrocities continue because the root cause, the genesis of the problem has not been addressed. What do you think about that?
Well, I have said so myself, that until we get down to the root causes of this conflict, the damage has already been done. The psyche of every Anglophone now living in Cameroon is imbibed with the grievances that have been brought to the fore and that have percolated society in the past 4 years. There is not a village now in the northwest or in the southwest region where you go to and you speak even to primary school kids, and they don't tell you about the grievances of Anglophones within that country. And so we have to have the courage to sit down and look at each other in the eye and address the root causes of these grievances and of this conflict. And until we do that, the rest is just sugarcoating. The rest is just speeches about a sense of normality which is not there. And then we're going to wake up to yet another massacre. You know, when the school kids were massacred in Kumba, everybody said never again. But Kumba was coming after we had Gabu, after we had Muyuka in the past. And we've not even finished grieving the school kids in Kumba, that we have more to happening now in Muyuka. And then we have the cases that you've indicated with the Pamol manager being killed, or the principals and other teachers being targeted for just trying to open up schools and provide opportunities for kids. This is unacceptable, and we need to recognize that.
In the end of year address of the nation, of the President of the Republic to the nation on the 31st of December 2020, he said that government has demonstrated political will, its will to solve this problem. But yet, despite that, people like Padia Sanga, a civil society activist, still say that government is not listening to other stakeholders. Government is not listening to the people. Do you think so?
Well, the fact that we're 10 days into the new year, and the levels of killings that we've seen from Jikwa through Manyu, through Menchum in Womb, through Ndian, now Kumba and Muyuka. I mean, the things that we've seen in the past 10 days are a reminder that whatever message was delivered on the eve of the new year, it's probably not resonating with the population or with the people who have control over the arms. It's about time that we stop talking and making lofty speeches. It's about time that we sit around table and we sort out our differences. And I think Cameroonians, especially Anglophone Cameroonians, are sick and tired of speeches being made over and over. What they want to see is people sitting around the table in a room and sorting out the differences so we can bring these things to an end. What purpose does it serve to make a lofty speech and then have people being killed, whether they're civilians, whether they're women and children, or whether they're people in uniform? It's just a stark reminder that the approach that has been taken thus far is not yielding dividends. And we have to think seriously about an approach that will bring some calm and an end to the hostilities, the atrocities, and the killings. And I think the sooner we can get to that, the better it would be for everybody.
Government thinks that what it's been doing so far to restore peace and normalcy in those two regions, it's not yielding the fruits as much as it would have desired. That is complete peace, total peace and normalcy in those two regions, because there are still people resisting government action, resisting the olive branch of the President of the Republic, talking about his call, which he reiterated on separatist fighters to drop their guns and come out of the bushes in his new year, in his end of year message to the nation. The government simply thinks that the people are resisting, especially civilians who are carrying guns. They are not ready to listen to government. They don't want to hear what government is saying.
Well, I think that if the government truly recognizes that these people are resistant to government appeals, that should be the beginning of wisdom. That should be the rationale for sitting down with the leaders of those groups to begin to find a way out together. Because if making speeches and calling upon them to drop their weapons hasn't yielded fruits for the past 4 years, going to the podium and calling on them to drop their weapons is not going to get us there. What is going to get us there is inviting the leaders of these groups and sitting down in a room, probably starting with a neutral setting, in a neutral platform, with help from mediators or intermediaries, and then sorting out the best way forward together. If a government delegation sat around the table with representatives of these armed groups, and that both delegations came out of extensive negotiations and made a joint communique that said that from henceforth no gun shall be fired in the northwest or in the southwest regions, that I bet that is likely, that kind of joint approach is likely to pay dividends than what we've seen thus far. And I hope that the government officials are listening to this and thinking through how to revise their approach so that whatever calls they make can be listened to.
Before we talk about the post-election protests and violence in the United States where you are, briefly, how are you people who are there in the United States managing to cope with the rising COVID-19 figures, with the rising COVID-19, the worsening COVID-19 situation over there? The figures are increasing despite the efforts of the government with all the health care mechanisms put in place, and even the vaccination going on. The figures are continuing to rise with the new variant. How are you people coping there?
Well, thank you very much for asking and for worrying about us and the community out here. We're hunkering down like everyone else that is currently resident in the United States. We're respecting the teleworking and the lockdown that's being imposed because of COVID-19. And we're trying to keep our heads down. But as everybody else, we're extremely concerned by the figures that continue to rise. It's very saddening to see that one of the countries with the best healthcare facilities is found itself in this position, where over 300,000 people have already died and millions have been affected, where hospitals are running out of beds, and where all predictions say that the worst is yet to come. So we're really hunkering down. And so you can just imagine for Cameroonians who are resident in the United States, the state of depression in which we now find ourselves, traumatized between what's happening in our home country and what's happening in our host country, and finding nowhere to go and looking desperately for that silver lining that can give us hope we can do better.
All right. Now, the latest information from the U.S. indicates that Democrats are planning to start second impeachment proceedings for Donald Trump following the post-election protests and violence.
Well, you know, what happened on Wednesday, January 6th, it's really unprecedented in U.S. history. And it did shake a lot of Americans. It also did send shockwaves around the world for people who look up to the United States and people who believe in democracy. And there's no doubt that one has got to admit that democracy is fragile. And what we saw last week was a direct threat to the existence of American democracy. As we go past the events of last week and into a new week with 10 days left before the swearing in of a new president, people are still grappling with their emotions. And what we now see in Congress is a call by Democrats mostly, but also by some Republican legislators, that Donald Trump ought not to be allowed to serve the remaining days of his presidency, that he ought to be held accountable for having incited the level of violence and insurrection that we all witnessed on TV screens around the world on Wednesday, January 6th. But obviously, the legislative process got to play itself out, and in the next few days, we'll be watching to see whether articles of impeachment are voted upon, or whether the 25th Amendment to the Constitution is evoked by the Vice President and members of Donald Trump's cabinet to determine that he's no longer fit for office. But this is a situation that the United States hasn't experienced in the last century. This is a situation that none of us had anticipated, but it's also a lesson that democracy can never be taken for granted, and it is fragile, whether we're talking about emerging democracies or old established democracies as well.
What can African countries pick out of what is happening there?
Well, African countries, I know that some of the autocratic regimes of the continent have been jubilating about the fact that American democracy is being tested. But I'm also really heartened by the reaction that I've seen from African Democrats, from civic leaders who have written opinion pieces, who have given interviews to say that what we're seeing is the resilience of the American people, is the resilience of lawmakers who, even after being attacked in the chambers of Congress, reconvened that same evening to make sure that the electoral process was completed as defined in the Constitution. Is the resilience of people who are critical, the media that's covering all of these events and helping the security services, the FBI notably, identify some of the ringleaders of the rioters that attacked Congress last week. It's the strength of institutions, the independence of the judiciary, the fact that Donald Trump petitioned 60 courts, filed 60 petitions before courts of law, and the courts did not allow themselves to be influenced just because he was president of the republic. It's the commitment of individual office holders, the poll workers, the Secretary of State of Georgia, who received a 1-hour phone call from the President of the United States and refused to yield. So these other good things are happening and are testament to the fact that as long as each and every one of us is committed to the democratic process, we can help the institutions function, and we can help the process withstand the shocks, even of leaders of autocratic tendencies.
Dr. Christopher Famuyo, Senior Associate for Africa, Regional Director of the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us. That would be it for today. Equinoxe is up next.